But we are going to go ahead and get started as a few more people are joining. So this meeting will be recorded. All right, today we're going to go over some announcements, and then I'll cover some of the data for cases. And then I'm going to review the ECE guidance update, as well as going over some Q&A. As always, we have some folks in the chat who will be working to answer questions, and then I'll also take some Q&A at the end. So our first announcement is that we did send some updated documents that we discussed on last week's call. We sent the sanitary measure, the close contact letters, and the test mask stay protocol. So all of these have been updated to reflect the 90-day guidance that was changed by the CDC. So that is just people who have tested positive in the last 90 days no longer have the need to quarantine. They just need to mask, similar to somebody who has been fully vaccinated. So all of that has been sent. We can send it again in the follow-up email if you guys haven't seen it, but it was sent on Monday. Update on test kits. Unfortunately, it's not great news. We continue to have almost 0 tests. Try to get more test kits. So we're just getting them kind of coming in a couple thousand at a time. So we are doing our best to fulfill some partial requests that we receive. So if you have put in a request and you have received any amount of tests from us, even if it was a small percentage of what you had requested, and you need more tests, go ahead and put in another request. But if you've made a request and you have received nothing, then you don't need to make another request. We still have that request on record, and it will be one that we'll fulfill when we get more tests. So I haven't heard anything that we will not be distributing tests this week. So my understanding is that we will be distributing more tests this week. Again, it's all just partial fulfillment of your requests at this time. If there's a big change in that, I will let you know. Right, so we do have a little bit of background noise. I'm just gonna mute somebody. Okay. I wanted to update you on our school support team here at the health department. You guys are mostly familiar with myself and Matt. Sylvia has been supporting all of our ECEs, so you might be familiar with her as well. We do continue to work on hiring a nurse who will be sort of the day-to-day liaison for the schools. They will eventually run this call and do a lot of the kind of day-to-day support for you guys. Our hope was to have that person in place in January, but then that person fell through. So we have posted the job on the Pima County website, and we'll be pulling applications next week. So we're hoping to find somebody great to join our team and help provide some more support to you guys. We also have 2 new temporary employees. They're intermittent employees through Pima County that have joined our team for the next few weeks, Lydia and Virginia. So if you call or email, you might get a chance to talk to them as well. All right, so going over some of the Pima County data. As of today, according to the CDC data tracker, we continue to be in very, very high transmission, but the wonderful news we have to share with you is that the rates are decreasing. So last week we were kind of not really sure. It was a little too early to tell if it was a true decrease or not, but both our positivity rate and our cases per 100,000 have decreased significantly. So this time last, we're now down to 13,064. We were last week over 1,600 cases per 100,000, and we're now down to 1,247 cases per 100,000 people. Our test positivity was up over 35%, I believe, last week, is now dropped down to about 29% test positivity. And our population of people in Pima County who are over 5 years of age, or 5 years of age and older, about 69.9% of them have been fully vaccinated. So that's great. Our older populations have the highest vaccination rates. Younger populations have the lowest vaccination rates.
A ver, ahí ya me metieron en la junta.
If you can stay on mute, that would be great until we get to the Q&A section. Again, this is just kind of looking at the same data. So this is specific to schools. The other data is county-wide. So we're also seeing the drop in schools cases. Just a couple weeks ago, we were getting reports over 1,000 cases per day from schools. And now Mondays are generally our highest days because you guys get hammered with stuff that's happened over the weekend. So this Monday we had 625 cases, and that has dropped down to under 400 cases for the rest of this week so far. So that is great, great, great news for all of us, because I know that our systems as well as your systems were all stretched to the max for the last month or so. So that's great news. All right, I'm going to jump into some of this guidance that was updated by the CDC and by Pima County regarding the early child care guidance. So I know that, you know, most of our work is focused on K-12 schools, but a lot of these K-12 districts also have pre-Ks and ECEs and other programs like that within your district. So we wanted to make sure that you guys also receive the same guidance information. So universal masking is still recommended in schools, including childcare and ECE, by the CDC, as well as by Pima County Health Department or Pima County Board of Supervisors resolution. So anybody who tests positive, if a child if they're asymptomatic, then they now, and they're over the age of 2, so they're able to mask, then they are now able to return to school after 5 days, plus the additional 5 days of masking. So the masking here remains extremely important. And so that's why it's only for children who are 2 years of age and older, because children under 2 should not be masking. So anybody who's remains asymptomatic can return on day 6 with 5 additional days of masking. Symptomatic children can end their isolation after 5 days if they meet the end of isolation criteria. So that criteria hasn't changed. That's fever-free for 24 hours without the usage of fever-reducing medications, and all other symptoms are improving or resolving. So if they meet that criteria, then they can also return to school. Oh, I'm so sorry. My Siri wanted to have something to say. They can also return to school after 5 days if they have the additional 5 days of masking. So children who are unable to mask, including all children under the age of 2, do have to continue isolating for the full 10 days. We have gotten questions about previously the guidance had, if you could test, they could return on day 8. That seems to have been removed from all CDC guidance. We will be looking into it today, but currently our guidance is that they would have to stay home for the full 10 days. As a close contact, then anybody who's unvaccinated should quarantine. We know that that's most children, since only 5 and up can vaccinate, but we know some of your older kids do turn 5 while they're still in ECE. But anybody who's not fully vaccinated needs to quarantine. If they're asymptomatic and over the age of 2 and can wear a mask, they can return after 5 days if they do the 5 additional days of masking. Children who are unable to wear a mask, or if they're under the age of 2, need to quarantine for the full 10 days. And then children who are fully vaccinated, or if they've had COVID within the last 90 days, they don't need to quarantine. But if they're over the age of 2, they do need to mask for 10 full days. Again, the current guidance for ECE and K-12 schools from the CDC is universal masking. But in the event that your facility is not masking universally, they at least would need to mask for the isolation and quarantine guidance, or stay out for the full 10 days. And as always, if a student tests positive or develops symptoms, they should immediately isolate. All of this is in a letter that was sent out to the ECE schools yesterday, or this morning, I'm sorry. We'll also be attaching that letter to our follow-up email today to all of you, as well as the Spanish version that I believe we just received. So we'll put that in the follow-up email so everybody has the same guidance. And that is all I have. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to unmute yourself, or if anybody monitoring the chat has any questions they like to read out, go ahead and do that. If you're just on the phone, you can hit *6 to unmute.
Kat, we have a question, and I'm not sure if someone from EPI is on our team, but there's a question about when they do the outbreak investigations, asking for redundant data that may have already been reported through the line list, and why that is.
So I don't know.
If this is Matt Christenberry from the EPI team. Yeah, I know sometimes there are some redundancy there with asking the questions about what's reported on the line list. It may not always be needed. There's a couple of factors that influence that. The first being when was the information reported? Because if it was reported that morning, some of the team members that are working on that response may not have access to that data right away, because we do have to process it. As I'm sure you guys all can imagine, we get a lot of reports of cases and contacts in our system, so we have to run that through a couple of different processing steps and that to be available. And that's kind of why we try to just ask for initials a lot of times, and it's not for the confidentiality concerns. It's more of just to keep it shorter and just so we can kind of get through the information quickly. And so that's kind of the biggest thing. And we also realize that a lot of times when we're doing these assessments, a lot of our school teams or schools and the staff that help with those assessments, they're wanting to get that information assessed as quickly as possible, so they can have a decision made on whether we think they should close a classroom or if there's an outbreak or whatever the situation may be. Sometimes we get those outbreak questions directed towards people, so they're right on the phone and there's no preparation time. And other times there may be a little bit of preparation, but it's just we may not have the information already processed and available. So and I know we've had some districts, for example, we had districts that send us emails with the information already there, so we can easily screen it and then we can get back to them really quickly without having to do a very long in-depth call. And other districts would rather just get on the phone and kind of walk through that. So that's kind of the reasons why. So we're trying to work on keeping those briefer as we move forward, but that's it. Thanks.
Matt, this is Kathy Stonley. Then if you're asking that we just send the line list to the person who's investigating, who would be the best person? Should that just be sent to school support? That we've got a call in, that we think we have an outbreak? How do we get it to the right person who we actually speak to?
Kathy, I kind of missed the first part of your question. I'm getting a lot of echoing and feedback. Let me, Kat, can you mute everybody?
Hi, I think I talked to you right now.
Okay, I think we're good now. Sorry about that, Kathy. I think you were asking essentially how to reach out to us about an outbreak, and maybe you re-asked that first part of your question, if you don't
Well,
mind.
yeah, what I was asking was, okay, so let's say we've sent an email or contacted school support and said we think we have an outbreak and we're waiting to hear back from epidemiology.
Mhm.
What would be the best way if we want to share the line list so that you have that data to start with, so that when we have the conversation, you already have it? How do we get it to the right person?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to share a copy of that, you can, you can send that over to the school support team.
Okay.
I just, make sure that if you're going to send any protected information, make sure it's secure. But what we've had a lot of, schools do is they may provide initials and then provide those 3 key dates that we always like to discuss in the body of an email, which I know it's kind of a pain if you got to retype it out, but if you want to copy and paste, that's fine as well. So because we have different nurse and health aides that do those steps. Or again, we've had schools share directly their line list with us, just so it's easy to find and stuff. But yeah.
Okay.
Perfect. I did see a question in the chat that I just wanted to address real quick. It says if a child under 5 has symptoms, but the parent does not want to test them, then how long should they stay out of school? Just until symptoms resolve, or 5 days, or all 10 days? So I would say they should stay out for 5 days, and then if their symptoms have resolved, they can return. Or if they don't resolve after the 5 days, they would need to meet that end of isolation criteria with the fever and all the other symptoms improving at least. So once they meet that criteria after the 5 days, they could return. And can you show me the link, where the link is to report cases? Was it moved? I don't believe it was moved, but if somebody could throw that in the chat, the link to the online portal, that'd be great. If anybody else, I think somebody has their hand raised. Hang on just a second. Nikki, go ahead. You can unmute yourself.
Yes, hi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. When we send where we might have an outbreak or 20%, my understanding was that email that we send school supports was not HIPAA compliant. Am I correct or incorrect?
So what do you mean by not being HIPAA compliant? Like you sharing that information?
Yeah, because
HIPAA?
Yeah, I'm thinking HIPAA, and for our district, it absolutely would be easiest just to share the line lists of the children that were in close contact and we may have transmission, because we save all those that we sent to Pima County Health Department, and so we could just attach them. Would that be helpful and permittable about each student?
Yeah, so I'll let Matt answer the part about what's preferred, but I do know that the Pima County Health Department is HIPAA exempt because so much data does have to be reported to us. So you're not breaking HIPAA by sharing that data with us. As far as like keeping things secure, that is a different issue, and that's more like online security. We don't want that getting hacked or anything like that with that protected health information. But I will let Matt answer as far as how they would like to receive that data.
Yeah, Nikki, so I think that what Kat made are good points. There's different ways that you could potentially secure an email. Like we have a couple methods here. We use Kiteworks, which is a secure messaging email platform. And then Microsoft or Outlook, has a way to secure what platform you guys use. So I maybe double check with IT on that from your perspective. But yeah, I think as far as it just depends. If you want, Nikki, you can reach out to me and I can assess what your guys' line list is, because we have a team now. Finally have a good team under our plate that's helping do these assessments. So, being able to get information to them quickly and easily and securely is just kind of the priority for us. And we've been assessing whether we want to try to implement I know another survey, but a survey to where do you guys have an outbreak, you could just go in and throw your information in there. And then so it would be secure and we would get it and all that stuff. So we're trying to assess that piece too. But I would be happy to connect with you, Nikki, via email. I think that would be fine because we've had other jurisdictions do that. As long as it's, you know, the information that's needed for that assessment and it's not like, say, a bunch of cases that aren't applicable to that situation. That would be my only concern, just, you know, just so we can make them quick, but I think it might be okay.
Terrific. I'll write something up and shoot it to you and see if that's acceptable for our district.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks, Nikki.
Perfect. Thank you, Nikki. Megan, I see your hand is up. If you want to unmute yourself.
Thank you, Kat. I just had a quick question. I have a parent questioning the 15 minutes within 3 feet. She's saying that the CDC site is 15 minutes cumulative or like within one instance, but isn't it over a 24-hour period?
It is, yes. So
Oh.
it's cumulative time. It could be in one instance, but it's throughout a 24-hour period.
Okay, I just wanted to verify because she was not happy. So
yes, and I believe that is outlined on the CDC website. I don't have a link for you right offhand, but
no worries.
I believe that is outlined on the website.
And I think it is as well. And I just wanted to make sure and double check, and so I don't know what I'm saying.
No, that's great. Thank you. Perfect. Does anybody else want to unmute and ask any other questions?
Yeah, this is Kathy again. I'll be a problem child. I just posted something. I just want to clarify because this has come up. I've had people ask me this question. Because the CDC's isolation guidelines do not require a test towards the end of isolation. It just says if you can find one, if you have one, if you want to do a test, and it turns up positive. The CDC guidance then says they need to keep their little behind at home for the entire 10 days. I just want to make sure that that's the guidance from the Pima County Health Department also, that in the unlikely event somebody can find a test and test their child and shares the result with us and it's positive, that means it's not just until it turns negative, they need to be home for the 10 days. Is that correct?
Yeah, so it's very confusing and tricky because always before this most recent guidance update, kind of at the end of December, the CDC always recommended that anyone who had already tested positive is not recommended in the first 90 days. So now them saying, well, you can test if you want, it just is a very mixed message and makes that more complicated. We have tried to stick with testing is not recommended in the first 90 days. If you're symptomatic and have a known exposure, you know, then you can reassess whether testing would be important in that instance. But yeah, I definitely, it's very confusing, but I would say yes, if somebody is still testing positive, they should remain.
And they do specify a antigen test. They do specify that it's the rapid home test, not a PCR, which, okay.
Yep, and so I would say if a test is positive, then a test is positive, we need to isolate that person. So I would agree with you that they do need to stay home the full 10 days in that case.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. I was trying to see if anybody else's hand is up. I don't think so, unless Megan, you still, Nikki, Megan, I don't know if you guys have new questions or if your hand's just still raised, but if you have new questions, go ahead.
I actually just thought of something, and as long as we had the time, I thought I would ask.
Yeah.
So if a person has a test and it's positive and they maybe test in the school and then they come to you all, some Pima County site, and they test and it's negative, are we still saying that the first test is the test we take?
Yeah, so if they tested positive, let's say on Monday, and then they test in a Pima County, whatever, on Thursday, they would still need to be isolating from that Monday test, that Monday positive.
Okay.
So in our mind, you don't get to test out of isolation. So if you're isolating and you happen to test negative on day 2, that doesn't mean you get to end isolation. You still have to do that. So
I'm sure, because, you know, I answer a lot of calls from parents. So I had a call from a parent. She had the antigen after she had pool testing. She had the Bionex Now antigen. She was positive in the school. So she made another test, not a PCR, another antigen test from Pima County that same day, and she was negative. And I said, the rule Pima County has always said is it's whatever the first test states. But you might want to call this line because that was an odd situation that they were both antigen tests and one positive, one negative.
Yeah. Yeah. And part of that too is that, well, two things. One, they're much more likely to have a false negative than a false positive. So if we're going to compare the two, the one we're going to trust is the one that says positive. The other issue is that the risk of having somebody who's positive, out in the community, or who's positive but test negative out in the community but is actually positive is a lot higher than somebody who's negative and happened to test positive and they're actually negative. That's not going to pose a risk. So yes, so we're on the same page. I don't know.
And that's what I told the parent, but I did give them your number because if I'm not mistaken, if they don't hear what we have to say, we can always refer to the email or the number for you all to have the conversation with them.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, you can send families to that school support line. And often if they're like, well, the school said this or that, whatever, we might, circle back and check back in with you guys just to ensure we're on the same page because messages often get lost in translation. But yes, you're always welcome to give out that phone number or email address to families if they are concerned about something. Yes. Awesome. I'm going to wrap it up there because we're just about at time. I have not been really watching the chat, so if there's stuff in here that's unanswered, we'll work to get that in the follow-up email. But we appreciate you guys so much for joining us today, and we will see you next Thursday. I do think somebody asked if we're seeing a decrease yet in data, and the wonderful news is that yes, we are. And it'll be in the slides. You'll be able to see it for yourself when we send out the follow-up. So thank you all so much for joining us today, and we'll see you next week.